Boom, there we go. So we're now recording. So moving to more specific COVID-19 questions. There's a lot of stuff going on right now between adding parklets or adding dining on the streets, or basically rethinking how we use our right-of-ways. The city has already used some slow streets. I believe today it was announced that where the permitting has really opened up for restaurants. Earlier this week, the mayor said that restaurants would be able to get new permits for outdoor seating. And there's all these things that are changing. Even in my neighborhood, I'm hearing people talking about ways that we can calm streets, and different ways that this whole the pandemic has kind of made people rethink our right-of-ways. What do you think about these changes? Do you think that a lot of these things are going to stick? Like, how do you think some of these changes are going to move forward, basically?
So, there's so much going on right now. I will say this, and they're kind of simultaneously happening at the same time. So we have one group essentially focused on coming up with a plan to implement the legislation that was passed by the council. Or if it's vetoed, we would have another plan that is similar, but maybe gives us a little bit more leeway. So it involves a lot. It's a logistically kind of difficult. Everyone is working remotely in administration. So you're having to make these plans similar to how we're talking right now. You're doing it on Microsoft Teams, you're doing it on a Zoom call, and you're dealing in some cases with very technical stuff. For the safe street stuff, that's the one I've been working more closely on, slow streets. Slow streets and kind of the lane closures is something I've been working more closely on. The legislation was we agreed as a department, and we said in our bill report that we agreed with the intent of the legislation. We did think it was kind of dropped on us by surprise and kind of rushed through. But, sometimes that's the way the cards are dealt. And it's our job to kind of figure out what to do. There's a number of challenges in the bill, but I do think we're going to be able to really implement a lot of these slow streets. And I think it's going to make a lot of people happy as long as they keep an open mind. We've begun the process of procuring necessary materials. We're working on there's eventually likely going to be an application portal. We're going to kind of try and shift a lot of the public outreach onto the city council people, because they're the ones who were kind of pushing this on us. And our community outreach capabilities right now are very limited. Our community outreach team is already having a challenging time dealing with COVID and not having traditional community meetings, but they're going to be working on the Complete Streets rollout. We have a number of other major projects and studies that are already going on across the city that require their attention. And to drop this on them and to try and adhere to the way the legislation was written is just not possible for our community team. So it's going to be something where we're going to need everyone to be a partner. We're going to need to have partners from other agencies, partners from the business community, partners from residents, partners from our elected officials. And if that all happens, then we'll see more. And we've kind of seen the beginning. We've seen Lake Montebello, we've seen Druid Hill, we've seen Linwood, and we'll likely have a lot more to see. As far as like the business district stuff and parklets and space for restaurants to operate outside, that is actually kind of being driven more so by the administration through Baltimore Development Corporation, which is the city's business development arm. DOT is looped in because we oversee all city right of way. One of the things that finance department has given us the authority to do at the leadership of the mayor and the administration to help out businesses. We're not only gonna kind of open up this public right of way for them to use it, we're actually gonna be waiving and rebating a number of the fees that are often kind of, discourage, I guess, business people are on the fence about embracing these programs. So I guess the long story short is there's a lot going on, but as we've all known, there's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot going on in the country. A month ago, 3 weeks ago, we were all talking about COVID-19, 2 weeks ago. And today, we're seeing public demonstrations on a scale that harken back to the 1960s. So that also has to be factored into whatever we do. And the interesting thing about what happened on Monday was DOT did close streets to give those who were participating in the demonstrations more space. And I think it all worked out really well. I think, all things considered, Monday was it was a proud moment for Baltimore City.
Do you have any, were you involved in any of the closures that happened on Monday?
So what's interesting is when COVID-19, Brian and I work in essentially the same office. There were a few weeks leading up to a state of emergency where a number of us were getting concerned about it. And by the time the city kicked into high gear and started shutting things down and working with the state and creating an emergency response plan, I had already been in contact with the mayor's office and with the health department, kind of saying, like, what are we doing? So I've been splitting my time over the past 3 months. I've been doing my DOT duties, but I've also been working on what's known as the Joint Information Center. And the city has pulled all of its PIO, public information officers, and essentially created a public information agency that filters information out all over the place. And originally it was for COVID-19. On Monday, the JIC actually transitioned under police. So I wasn't involved, but I was part of getting that information out. I know that was kind of long-winded. Yeah, sorry.
That's great. So switching topics a little bit, Baltimore City has our Charm City Circulator, which is partially funded by the MTA. The MTA has taken an absolute beating financially, as has the city. And as we move forward, how does that relationship between the MTA and BC DOT, looking at not only our circulator, but how transit is kind of going to work and how that relationship is going to work? How do you see that moving forward?
I mean, since I've been at DOT, especially since Director Sharkey's been, appointed as director, we've really prioritized resetting the button and building that relation back with MTA. And I think it's going great. We have a monthly recurring meeting, and I know that Theo, who's our deputy director, and I know that Steve, who is our director, I know that they talk with, and I know that Charles Penny, our Trans Bureau chief, I know that they all talk with MTA on the regular. It's going to be a tough time financially. We saw that with Kerwin being cut. We're seeing it in the city with revenues being down $20 million per month. So that's next year, if that continues, that is a $240 million hole. It has to be filled. That's just the city. You don't know what the state's going to do in terms of their finances. And the thing that people need to keep in mind is local governments and state governments cannot run deficits. It's illegal. We're not like the feds. We can't print money. So I think what we can do now, and I think what we have done already, is work with our federal partners, our federal legislators, to really advocate for federal transit aid. And it could be operating, and hell, throwing some capital money too, and let's get a light rail line built here. I mean, out of really crazy situations like this, there are all these silver linings, because the government is going to be pressured to keep the economy going. So you never know what's going to come out on the other end. But it's going to be our job to really advocate with MTA for things that we know are good for our region, good for our economy, good for our people.
How do you see our relationship with the state, especially as we're looking at budget priorities for the city and for the state moving forward? How do you see those things kind of moving forward, since the state is dealing with the same cuts that we are, to a larger extent? Yeah. How do you foresee the next budget cycle happening?
So it's going to be difficult. I know that I don't know for sure, but I know here's the reality. The state never fully restored the city's highway user revenue. And they, it's true, it was cut under the O'Malley administration during the recession, Great Recession. And that was because...
Can you talk about what the highway user revenue is and how that's kind of calculated?
Yeah, so there's like all these funding buckets, and even within transportation, there's separate funding buckets, and it's something that I'm still learning. But one of those funding buckets is called highway user revenue, and I believe highway user revenue, the fund is created by a combination of a portion of the fuel tax and like titling fees or like registration fees. And it creates this huge sum of money, and Baltimore City gets the largest share of any direct share. Let me be very clear about that. We get the largest direct share of any local government because of how unique we are. We're the only local government in Maryland that is responsible for maintaining state highways. Like we control it. MDOT doesn't come into the city to do anything. For the most part, there are some special exemptions, but the minute you drive Harford Road and you cross that city line into the county, in the city, Harford Road's operated and maintained by Baltimore City DOT. In the county, it's not maintained by Baltimore County. It's maintained by the State Highway Administration. So another example is Interstate 83 and 295. Like, there's no other local government in Maryland that maintains and operates an interstate highway. So there's all these relics kind of our past when the city was this powerhouse financially. And we still have this power, although we're definitely not as strong as we were, say, 50 years ago. But that doesn't have to stay that way. But during their last recession, our share of HUR funding was drastically cut. And cumulatively over the past 12 to 13 years, we've lost out on anywhere between $900 million to $1 billion in funding that could have gone broadly, mostly to transportation stuff. So it's really critical that we that we get that restored. And we'll never see, don't even think about ever getting that money back that you've lost. That's never going to happen. So what we got to focus is on it, at the very least, getting that funding formula back. And it's going to be really hard now with the drop in revenues as a result of the economy kind of crashing. So it's going to be challenging. I think we are better positioned, though, financially than many people would assume. We're at that point in time. I've always felt we're increasingly catching up to that point in time where the bad economics of sprawl are going to start catching up to these lower density, high population counties. The city definitely has some infrastructure challenges, but I'm not really concerned about our financial well-being. I think we're going to be solid. It's going to be tough. It's going to be a tough few years, but we'll make it through it.
Yeah, we started seeing that with Baltimore County doing their first, I think, property tax increase. I believe it was last year. That was the first one in like 20 years or something, because they need to start funding education. And yeah, you're starting to slowly see those expenses that they haven't had to deal with. I mean, they were essentially making the same mistakes as Baltimore City did, 100 years ago.
An interesting thing I found out when I went to DOT, because I looked at every orange cone resurfacing project in the city, and I started to notice a discrepancy in resurfacing cost for projects that were one block. And what I found out was that the price to resurface a roadway on a traditional row house block is half the cost of what it costs to resurface a block if you're up in like Hamilton or Huntington Ridge. So the more suburban streets in the city are more expensive to maintain. And
is that because they're wider?
Yeah, it's more material. Just a very basic thing. More square feet, more material, more cost, needs more labor. And you kind of multiply that times every single road in the county and understand that it's not just road resurfacing that they need to maintain, it's everything. We're actually in a really great position when you think about it, because, and that this is why I've always been very reluctant about any push to annex additional land. We're very compact, we're very dense. Even though we've lost a third of our population, we're still one of the most dense cities in the country. So we're going to be fine, I guess is my thing. It's amazing that people kind of overlook some of the looming challenges for these other localities.
I know that, so I've seen a few graphs out there, with everybody having their cell phones. It's been an amazing time to be able to kind of see trends on how people are moving. I know Google has done some of that stuff. I saw some graphs from Apple earlier this week as well, kind of showing like how are people commuting differently now. And in the one from Apple I saw showed that walking has basically returned to normal. Driving has nearly returned to normal, but transit has, just in Baltimore City has taken a huge nosedive. So we're, sitting out on my stoop, I can see that there's a lot more cars sitting in the same parking spot, which indicates that there's a lot of cars that aren't moving as much, but we're still seeing a lot more traffic and a lot less transit usage, which for a compact city like ours is not a great thing. Asking you to kind of pull out your crystal ball, how do you think things like that are going to impact how the city does projects with both higher speed traffic, higher volumes? Like where do you think the city is going to be going with some of its long-term projects?
So when you look at complete streets, in a nutshell, it's saying these streets are ours. These are Baltimore streets. You can commute if you want to from the county to Baltimore City, but you got to be mindful of the people who live here. And that's kind of what Complete Streets is in the most basic form. So there might be more people driving, and and I think it's going to be kind of temporary. I think there's definitely going to be, as we're dealing with this public health crisis, a reluctance of people to kind of be in crowds, especially with folks that they don't know where they've been. So that's going to require MTA to think really creatively, and we can certainly help and see what we can learn from our little transit bureau. But I think with Complete Streets, and as we slowly implement that over time, it's just going to kind of reposition the balance, and it'll be easier for people to bike. It'll be easier and more enjoyable for people to walk. People will feel safer. And for driving, it's not going to be bad, but your commute might be an extra 2 or 3 minutes. And for some people, the other trade-off for the city is like, well, if the commutes are longer and people work here and the employers want to stay here, then that just encourages people to move here. So, I'm not too worried about it.
Well, as a huge cheerleader for the city, it's interesting to see your perspective on that. Some of the bigger projects for Baltimore City recently have been like Harbor Point, which still has a bunch of towers that were planned. It's got Port Covington, but COVID has basically turned everything on its head, where like even DOT's office has barely been used recently. You have a lot of employers that normally have thousands of employees coming downtown using I-83, using all these gateway streets that may no longer need people to make those commutes. Maybe taking kind of a step away from the transportation question and kind of alluding to your bigger city county point that you're kind of making. Where do you think this is, like, how do you think this is going to shake out? Do you think more people are going to want to move to the city to be around a lot of these amenities that we have? Or do you think people are going to say that we don't need to be as close to my workplace, so I can go live anywhere, and I'm going to go live out in central Pennsylvania?
Yeah. I think a lot of that's personal preference. But I will say, like, it is a little concerning when you think about what does the future for office space look like. And there was already, trends that showed that businesses were becoming more efficient with the amount of office space for employee. So this might accelerate that. The important thing to understand, though, is that, if people are working from home, then, as long as they're living here, or if they decide to live here, I don't really see that as being, like, I'm not really concerned about that either. And, like, I guess the other thing, because I did think about it, if we see it get to the point where you see office vacancy rates spike, we already have a tax credit on the books that has been heavily used to convert commercial properties over to residential. And we've seen that all over downtown. Like, the commercial office market in downtown has definitely seen better days. But in terms of, like, apartments, it's kind of been a golden age over the past 10 years. And I think when you're forced, this is me speaking personally, and again, I think it goes down to social isolation, it goes down to people's personal preferences. But when you've been kind of socially isolated for as long as we all have, you kind of see the value of being around people, and socializing. So I think it's going to vary, but again, it's preference. I think cities will continue to be the places that attract talent and the innovation centers. And Um, that's what cities have been throughout human history. You know, it was only this really unique kind of 50 or 60-year period in American history that kind of strayed away from that. And I think that you could make the argument that a lot of our country's problems are tied to that.
Yeah, it's how this all shakes out. I mean, we see just how much of our transportation infrastructure is left for commuters. Um, you know, seeing these big wide roads that are all of a sudden not being used as much or used much more lightly really kind of shows us just how much space we really dedicate for commuters. Um, but we have about 10 minutes left, so I kind of wanted to kind of move to some of those more politics, election type questions. You know, we are in the hopefully a short or not recount, but a cycle of finding out who is going to be our next elected leaders. Can you talk a little bit about like what it's like kind of being on the other side, what it's like running an election, waiting for results, and what, you know, a lot of these you know, potential elected leaders are dealing with right now?
Yeah, I mean, running for office is literally one of the hardest things to do. Um, it was really a battle of it's a physical battle and a mental battle. And when I was running, I was encouraged to run by then Council President Young's former chief of staff. And he was like, look, I was 23 at the time, and I was very idealistic with very little experience under my belt. He could see that I cared about the city, and there was an open seat in the 46th district, and he was like, go for it. In all likelihood, you're going to get your butt kicked, but it'll be good for you to get the experience. And when it's all said and done, you'll see if this is really what you want to get involved in with the rest of your life. And I was like, yeah, sure, this is great. Like, I was really excited. And then the next day it was like, okay, here's everything you need to do, and you need to do over the next 2 years. Because if you're really running a serious campaign, you like start 2 years before election day. And as you get closer and closer to election day, you get less and less free time. And you're constantly begging people for money, and you're constantly knocking on doors. And there's some people who are really nice to you, and it's really cool. And then there's also some people who are really mean and nasty. And, you know, you have to be true to yourself as why you want to run. And kind of going full circle on the whole transportation thing. When I ran for 46th district, I was a big red line supporter. And there were people who were advising me, why would you support this? This is like, this is like more harmful than anything. And I was kind of, you know, in a rock and a hard place. I was like, well, these people have the political experience, but I feel really strongly about this. And the conclusion that I ended up having is like, well, why am I running for office if I'm not going to support the things that I think are going to be good for the city? So I ended up sticking with the red line. And I think this shows you how long ago 2014 was. Our first flyer that we came out with was not only supporting the red line, it was advocating for weekend mark service. And then like literally within a week of us getting like 10,000 flyers printed, O'Malley made the executive decision. So our flyers were like immediately out of date. So like little things like that happen. It's like you're like running a small business. And I came from a more modest background. Like my parents worked for the city, but they weren't really political. We didn't have money. We were like a family that we were middle class, but we were, quite honestly, we were living paycheck to paycheck. And I think for that state delegate race, we raised like $20,000 and came in fifth. but people were really impressed with how we did, and like considering how young I was and how little money we had, and everyone on the campaign was young. I couldn't afford to pay a campaign manager. These were friends who were volunteering. All the graphics design stuff was designed at my brother's apartment with me. The only it was as grassroots as you can get, other than the fact that Jack Young endorsed me. And then he made a few phone calls and got like a few checks, but it wasn't much. Like in the grand scheme of things, again, I only raised 20 grand. So it was a great experience. It was really frustrating. And it did prepare me. Like I achieved, I think, what the goal was, which is what I learned. And immediately I went back to working with the council president, and he made me write a list of what we did right and what we did wrong. I think it's still in my employee file or something.
So I mean, so the city is really kind of at an interesting crossroads right now, because you know, we have had so many new people running for office. You know, for instance, the board of estimates is guaranteed to have 3 new people on it. It could have, or based from last year to next year, you know, you're going to have at least 3 new people on it. You could have complete turnover depending on how this election goes.
Yeah.
Normally, Baltimore City, you know, you move into city council president, then you become mayor. You know, that's kind of been all shaken up this time. As somebody who's lived in the city for a long time, what do you think what kind of impacts do you think that's going to have for the city? You know, especially with like a transportation department where the director is, you know, at will of the mayor.
So when a mayor comes in, it's a strong mayor form of government. So they have a lot of discretion in terms of any appointee who's appointed by the mayor. I'm an appointee, technically. The director of transportation is. So whoever wins, and right now it does look like it's going to be Sheila Dixon returning, she'll have a lot of discretion in terms of who is going to be working where. And it you know, it's going to be interesting, but I'm really still excited. You know, I'm excited about what the next few years are like, what's in store for Baltimore, even though there's obviously been a number of challenges that 2020 has thrown our way that might stick with us for a little bit. And then if it turns out that Sheila Dixon becomes mayor and Nick Mosby becomes council president, those are new people, but they're also people who were here before. Sheila Dixon was already mayor, and Nick Mosby once served on the council. And he also has Annapolis experience now, which, you know, will probably play a role in how he decides to manage the city council. So there are some interesting dynamics, but there's experienced people coming in, and, you know, we'll see what happens.
So we'll wrap it up with one last question. There's, you know, over the last few years, there have been a lot of hits on Baltimore. You know, last year we had the ransomware, which was, you know, right before Catherine Pugh resigned, and our last mayor, Stephanie Rawlings Blake, resigned in the wake of the Freddie Gray uprising. You know, we're seeing protests now. You know, we're in the middle of a contentious election race, and COVID. So there's plenty of things to be pessimistic about, not just for Baltimore, but in general. But what are 3 things that have you excited for Baltimore for the next year? What has you excited for June 2021?
It's a great question.
Yeah, I didn't prepare you for that.
Yeah. That's a great question. For the next year, I mean, it'll be exciting. It'll be exciting to see kind of this next chapter, city leadership. There are still some really cool projects moving forward for Baltimore. I like the plans for Penn Station kind of updating, and it's a station that gets so much traffic down the Northeast corridor. To really invest in that and show these other travelers that, man, there's some really cool stuff happening in Baltimore too. It's a real big deal. So I like the idea of the Penn Station project moving forward. North Avenue Rising, there's going to be some cool stuff with that. One of the things we've done in DOT for our capital budget is essentially create these little incentives for MTA to partner with us. So essentially we have I think it's like $5 million for 2 years, so a total of 10 million, where we're saying we have $10 million in capital money. If you guys also throw in some money to do some transit corridor prioritization. And that's an example of that stronger partnership between city DOT and MTA. Those are just a few examples. You got complete streets, every major tech project, which is from our transportation engineering and construction division, they're going to be implementing treatments similar to what you saw on President Street with the Continental crosswalks. That's the new city standard. These are like little things. I know I'm like talking like a transportation nerd here.
That's everybody in here.
Yeah. All these things have me excited for Baltimore. There's also other like things unrelated to transportation, even though it's going to like highlight something that's very unfortunate that happened here. But even David Simon's new show on the Gun Trace Task Force, that'll be an eye-opening show. And again, it'll be Baltimore that somehow this major city, but not on the scale of New York or LA or Chicago. Somehow we always find ourselves in the center of the national discourse. It's pretty amazing. Yeah. So we've got a lot of fun times ahead.
Well, excellent. Well, I really appreciate your time. This has been a lot of fun. I hope everybody else enjoyed it as well. I think we're going to be trying to have some more events. So everybody was here. We will be sending out the survey, asking what kind of things you'd like. If you want more things like this, I know I really enjoyed it. So I appreciate you taking the time, Liam. But yeah, let us know if you don't want to do the survey. You can also just email us, ybtbaltimore@gmail. And yeah, thank you very much, Liam, for your time.
Thank you, everybody. It was a pleasure.
All right. Everybody have a good one.